Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on Doordarshan, India's national television channel on Indian foreign policy, India's international relations and global and regional developments that have an impact on India's rise as a major power. Viewers, in this episode we are taking a close look at a seminal rivalry in West Asia or the Middle East, the undeclared war between Iran and Israel. These two major powers, both of which have strategic partnerships with India, but have been at loggerheads, and the tensions that flare up between these two countries can set the whole region in flames. So why is that, and what can be done about this, and how can we in India cover for the repercussions of the Iran-Israel undeclared war? That's the topic for this episode, and to discuss this I am very privileged to introduce you to a very distinguished retired diplomat, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat. Ambassador Trigunayat served in that region. He was India's ambassador to Libya and to Jordan. He is a distinguished fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation, major think tank of India. Ambassador, welcome back to Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you, Professor Chaulia. It is amazing and always good to talk to you.
Ambassador, Iran versus Israel, at least since the 1979 revolution, since the establishment of the Islamic Republic, this has always been a kind of a underlying theme. Sometimes it comes to the surface and becomes explosive, sometimes it is there, and especially since the October 2023 war between Israel and Hamas, the Iran factor has come to the fore, because Hamas is one of the many so called proxies of Iran in the region. And now we are seeing that the provocation, the tit for tat, the violence continues to escalate, and there is a real fear of an all out war in West Asia or the Middle East. So I'd like you to start with, what is it that makes this such an intractable competition between these two in particular?
You see, if you remember, Professor, before 1979, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel, all these were part of the NATO alliance and the Western US led alliance. But when the Shah was deposed and we had the revolution in Iran and Ayatollah Khomeini came to power, he obviously was anti-American. And all these began from that point of view. Of course, they have these Abrahamic religions, all three of them, the Christianity, the Judaism and the Islam, all three are part of that, but there have been a constant warfare among them as well. So the sectarianism was very much there, and from there on they wanted to export their kind of Islam, the Islamic revolution in different parts of the world. That's where the Saudi Arabia went on the other side, being a Sunni led country. The Israelis became the poster child for the US in the Middle East. Besides, the Palestinian issue has always been on the front, and that provides many of these regimes or provided rather until recently a major, I would say, a reason or raison d'etre. The nuclear factor, yet again, is another major problem between the two, I would say, and this is a strategic rivalry on that particular point, because Israel became a nuclear power even though undeclared. But Iran has been trying to, and many people say that it has already acquired sufficient expertise. Expertise it has, but whether it has the weapon systems or not, one does not know. So they tried to build up their arsenal, both of missiles as well as for the nuclear capable platforms, which is what gives a fear to Israel as well. Israel does not want Iran to become nuclear or go nuclear. That has been one thing. Until recently, even Saudi Arabia did not want that, and that was one of the reasons that Saudi Arabia during President Obama's time felt rebuffed, and this Yemen adventure began, just to convey a message that we are also there. So fortunately for them, Trump came and he busted this whole deal, JCPOA, and since then they have all been war at loggerheads. Now there are many books written about it, that Israeli intelligence services have tried to decimate, kill, or create some kind of things in their nuclear facilities, so that just to delay the arrival of Iran as a nuclear power. So there are these fundamental differences and strategic competition in the region. But good thing is that since last year we have seen that Iran and Saudi Arabia and many other countries which had problems with one another in the region. So there was a wave of rapprochement that was happening. And during this October 7 you mentioned, we have seen that despite all the provocations here and there, despite the proxies 3H as it is Hamas, Hezbollah and Houthis being partly in the game, not fully, Hamas is very much there, but Hezbollah is partly in the game and so is Houthis. Iran has directly absolved itself of any responsibility of these so far. But because there was a rapprochement taking place through Abraham Accords and others between Israel, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco and Sudan, we have seen that this is something that also gives us sort of a fear. And now the Saudi Arabia normalizing the ties with Israel could have been another provocation for
from an Iranian
point of view as well. But the fact that Iranians and Saudis have continued to confer together, because they have also realized, in my view, that in the region they are not going to get any dependable security provider.
So they have to coexist.
They have to coexist. That's very important.
But Ambassador, coming to the 3Hs, let's start with the biggest player, which is Hezbollah.
Yes.
It is in southern Lebanon, right across the Israeli border, and of course closely allied with the Palestinian Hamas, although one is Shia and the other is Sunni. And with Hezbollah, some estimates say they have 100,000 or more fighters, active fighters. They have 150,000 or more rockets set up in an arsenal, and they are far more lethal and devastating than Hamas. So in that kind of situation, there is a high chance that if the northern front of Israel is activated by Hezbollah, then it becomes a an all-out war, and that's what everyone is saying we must prevent it. Even India is saying we don't want a region-wide escalation. But if Hamas is going to be completely crushed or attempted to be eliminated by Israel, which is what they are set out to do since the October 7 attacks, then perhaps for Iran, which is the the fountainhead, so to say, they probably will have to do something via Hezbollah to stop the complete elimination of Hamas, right? I mean, from their point of view, their ring of fire, as some of their leaders used to call it, or their axis of resistance, has to survive, and for that they will need to put pressure on Israel, right? That's the real risk, isn't it?
Well, this has been expected for quite some time, because whether this is between Hamas, which is fighting for its cause, and again, I mean, one of the major reasons for Hamas to get into this October 7 kind of, I would call it a success and fiasco, both for them, is that there was, if Saudi Arabia had really normalized ties with Israel, then that was, in my view, was the end of the Palestinian cause, which was already in the back burner for most countries except Iran and Turkey. They were the only two champions, and the Sunni countries mostly just pro forma mention of the Palestinian cause. Hezbollah has been there, they have had the war, Israel also that fought in 2006 and all. They are really, as you said, and I have visited and seen them, they are really very strong, and they govern half of the country like with their own writ large. They are part of the political dispensation. At the moment, given the situation in Lebanon, the economic condition, the political instability and all, they were not so keen to go full-fledged into the war, but they wanted to keep the Israelis distracted, so that the Israelis engaged on both the fronts in that sense. So I think that, and that's when Houthis also began from there, sending some missiles here and there, which were intercepted, of course, by Americans. But they wanted to continue to maintain pressure so that Hamas is not fully eliminated. Question comes as to, of course, they are a very strong army, and they can create a lot of damage to Israel. And damage is the fear of this only has caused more than 700,000 Israelis to be displaced.
Yeah, from the north.
From the north, while 1.7 or 1.9 million Palestinians have been displaced because of the Israeli attacks. In Gaza, here it is just the fear of that attack and occasional missiles here and there. So you can imagine they are small countries, they are not very big countries. So the periphery, the area is not so much. And any country, howsoever big, we have seen the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, everybody, whichever rich, strong, powerful militaries they may have, but they all get hurt in the bargain.
They all get hurt in the bargain, says Ambassador Anil Trigunayat. The viewers, Let's watch this interesting video about recent events involving Hezbollah and Israel and the clashes between them, and continue the discussion.
This video released by the Israeli military on Monday is said to show bombardments targeting structures and fortifications used by the Hezbollah militant group in southern Lebanon. And a security source said a commander of Hezbollah's elite Radwan force named Wissam Tawil was killed. Tawil's assassination marks one of the most high-profile attacks on Hezbollah's senior officers in 3 months of hostilities with Israel. There was no immediate comment from Israel. But sources, including a Syrian military intelligence officer, told Reuters that Israel is carrying out an unprecedented wave of deadly strikes targeting cargo trucks, infrastructure, and people involved in moving weapons from Iran to proxy forces in the region, including inside Syria. The sources said that while Israel has attacked Iranian-linked targets in Syria for years, it shifted strategies after the October 7th rampage by Hamas fighters into Israeli territory. The intensified air campaign has killed 19 Hezbollah members in Syria in 3 months. More than 130 Hezbollah fighters have also been killed by Israeli shelling of southern Lebanon in the same period. The Israeli military did not respond to questions from Reuters about its escalating campaign. Exchanges of fire along Israel's northern border have become near daily occurrences since October 7th. On Saturday, Hezbollah claimed it fired some 62 rockets at an Israeli observation post. The threat of escalation comes amid a fourth visit by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to the region.
From day one, as I said, we've been working to make sure the conflict doesn't spread.
Blinken last week said a wider conflict was in no country's interest.
We know that this is not what Israel wants or seeks. It's not what we want or seek. I know from Lebanon's perspective, it's not in the interest of Lebanon to see any escalation.
Israel has pledged to eliminate Hamas leadership both inside the Gaza Strip and beyond. Last week, a suspected Israeli strike killed Deputy Hamas chief Saleh al-Aruri in Beirut's southern suburbs, an area controlled by Hezbollah. Israel has neither confirmed nor denied its responsibility for that attack.
Right. So, viewers, you are seeing this escalation between Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies and their attempt to hold on to their regional influence. So let me come back to Ambassador Trigunayat. Ambassador, you talked about this being a strategic competition, and here when you look at the map and look at the major spaces here, the Israel-Palestine is probably the one that gets the most attention, but the Israel-Iran is the one that is much broader and even goes beyond the Palestinian issue. And we just saw, we already spoke about Hezbollah, and we are seeing the tit-for-tat violence, but they have other proxies in the region. You mentioned the Houthis of Yemen. They also have a large number of proxies in Iraq and in Syria, many of whom are Shiite and who owe allegiance to the Iranian regime. So, it's a fact, right? It's a fait accompli on the ground that many of these countries, Iranian proxies, are entrenched, are part of the society, and are actually quite powerful. You already mentioned Hezbollah. So, the question really is, can they really be stopped, or can their sphere of influence be in somehow disrupted? I mean, the Israeli strikes that we just saw probably will not be able to do much beyond just sending some kind of a deterrence message not to get involved in the Gaza war. But otherwise, the attempt to isolate Iran or to not give its due place in the region seems to have backfired, in the sense like they have tried it over and over again and it's not working.
No, one thing is there, that Iran is not isolated at all, and Iran remains a major factor in the security and stability of the region. That is the pivot in my view. But at the same time, Iran is also understands, seeing its own domestic problems and economic, it's the most sanctioned country, and I think Russia is now the most sanctioned. But in this one, what we have seen in the Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthi, well, or many others like the Islamic militias that we have, various groups in Iraq that you mentioned. Now, all these could be activated by Iran if something truly existential comes to itself, its own security. Why we are not seeing them full-fledged as of now, and Iran not wanting to expand this war beyond, is because Hamas is one of its sort of proxies or surrogates, but is not the most critical one. And as long as the war goes on there, the Palestinian issue has come back to the fore. It has also stopped a lot of rapprochement, other initiatives with Israel, which have been for a while it has gone. So Iran, if Iran is attacked, let's say, then you will have other powers. You will have the China, Russia. There is a geostrategic competition between them. So they will also have to play their cards, and they all will be there. Now it's already a most congested traffic area, this Red Sea and Bab el-Mandab, and if Strait of Hormuz is stopped, then you can imagine what happens to the maritime routes all over. And then the whole of Middle East will, in that sense, becomes a conflagration zone, and which nobody wants. And that's what the Americans are saying. The India does not want it, because our well-being, frankly, in my view, depends a great deal on the stability in the region, in the West Asia.
And the sea lanes of communication.
Safe, and our diaspora, the oil supplies and everything, there's quite a lot dependent on that. So I think that we have to, India has to continue to work on this also, so that this does not escalate with other friends. At the same time, we have to secure, which we are doing already in the Red Sea and others, our Navy, because we are a resident power in the Indian Ocean. However, the situation, this war between, you see that the crux of the whole thing has been always that if you do not resolve the Palestinian issue for good,
has a way of
it
coming
will
back.
continue to come back.
Yeah, right. I mean, the political settlement remains, and that's why we are seeing these recrudescence of violence. But Ambassador, on the issue of the Iranian strategy in the region and whether there can be a rapprochement with Israel, I mean, that's really the question, because if Iran can go for rapprochement with Saudi Arabia and with the UAE and with the Gulf countries, earlier they were also seen to be sworn enemies. What will it take for us to, I think otherwise these cycles of violence will keep on repeating, right? Even the Palestinian question, because Iranians are pushing it, it will keep coming back in some form or the other through next attack or next attack. So can we not think of something of that level, like Iran-Israel rapprochement? Probably that will solve all the problems in the region.
No, you are quite right, but let us not forget that this is a volatile region. And there are so many intra-regional dynamic which plays out at any given time. I mean, UAE, Saudi Arabia have their own dynamic. The Qatar has its own separate dynamic. Now it's more closer to Iran and to Turkey in that sense. So this, what the Iranians have been coming out with, they have come out with something called Hormuz Peace Plan. That was essentially for all the countries to decide about their security about this thing. Some say, the other side would say that this means the Iranian hegemony in the place. So, this becomes a very difficult thing. As far as Israel is considered, Israel also considers Iran as an existential threat for itself. So, you are asking what will it take to, of course, we can't say that there is, it's never again, or it will never happen. It might happen, because before 1979, at the end of the large number of Jews used to live there. And Israel was very much involved in transferring the nuclear technology also to the Iranians. I mean, when they were part of the same grouping. So you never know tomorrow. I mean, there might be a change in regime in Iran, because there is a lot of disaffection there, and those people will start thinking differently. Because what I hear is that in Iran, at the grassroots level, people like Americans, ordinary people,
especially younger
generation
urban,
there. So I mean, anything is possible and can happen, and I hope it does. At the same time, in Israel also will have to consider, if it wants to have it can only be secure, frankly, in my view, if it tries to remove historical irritants and injustices. Without that, it will be very difficult.
There has to be a structural approach to this, not just war, because war alone will not solve the issues. But viewers, talking of other Iranian proxies in Syria and Iraq also, they have a number of players aligned with Iran and with whom Israel is involved in a kind of a low intensity or medium intensity conflict. Let's just learn a little bit about them and continue the discussion.
A senior advisor in Iran's Revolutionary Guards has been killed in an Israeli airstrike on Syria. Iranian state TV interrupted its regular news broadcast to announce the death of Sayed Razi Mousavi, describing him as one of the Guards' oldest advisors in Syria. He is seen here with Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Guards' elite Quds force, who was killed in a US drone attack in Iraq in 2020. Iranian officials have vowed revenge for his death, with the president saying it showed weakness on the part of Israel. There was no immediate comment from Israel's military. Israel has for years carried out attacks against what it describes as Iran-linked targets in Syria. Tehran's influence has grown in the country since it backed Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in the civil war that erupted in 2011.
Debris and burnt-out vehicles litter the ground in the Iraqi city of Hilla, where the US military said it carried out airstrikes against Iran-aligned militants on Monday. At least one serviceman was killed, and 18 other people were wounded. Iraq's government condemned the strikes as a clear hostile act. Two Iraqi security sources said the strikes targeted the headquarters of Iraqi armed group Kataib Hezbollah in Babul province, south of Baghdad. Iraq's central government has limited control over some Iran-backed factions. Mourners later carried the coffin of the fighter during the funeral in Baghdad. One of the attendees, Sheikh Fadel Al-Ghazi, said the airstrikes were a serious crime and a blatant violation of the sovereignty of the Iraqi state. The US strikes were retaliation for an earlier drone attack on an Erbil airbase in Iraq that left a US soldier in critical condition and wounded 2 others. The back-and-forth clash was just the latest example of how the Israel-Hamas war is rippling across the Middle East. The US is Israel's closest ally, and the conflict has turned US troops at bases in Iraq and Syria into targets. There are 900 US troops in Syria and 2,500 in Iraq to help advise local forces preventing the resurgence of Islamic State, or ISIS. The US military has already come under attack at least 100 times in Iraq and Syria since the Israel-Hamas war began in October. The latest unrest comes less than a week after US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin returned from a trip to the Middle East, focused on containing efforts by Iran-aligned groups to broaden the Israel-Hamas war.
So viewers, the threat of the broadening of this Israel-Hamas war is an ever-present one, and as long as the conflict goes on, there is that danger. Coming back to Ambassador Trigunayat, so the Iraq, Syria, we've covered a lot of theaters. There are also the Houthis in Yemen that you've mentioned. Now, if you come to India and our perspective, we would ideally want, no war and no terror. And we have been saying that we are against both these things.
Correct.
No? But the reality is terror attacks have also happened. Israel has been attacked, and then this devastating war has been unleashed, and there is a threat that through Iranian, active involvement, that this can become an even bigger war. So in this kind of situation, when our vessels are being attacked, there is a clear threat to commerce that we spoke about. What would be our messaging to the Iranians and to the Israelis? I mean, how do you think? I mean, you served in our missions there. We have strategic partnership both with Iran and with Israel. The one with Israel is stronger because it's endorsed by the US. The one with Iran, we would have gone much further had it not been for the sanctions, the US sanctions on Iran. But still, we are doing a lot of things like Chabahar and all these things with Iran, which are strategically important for us to contain the Pakistanis and the jihadist threat, the Sunni jihadist threat in the region. So, what would be our messaging to these countries?
Iran has a unique position in the region, is that it has very close strategic or military strategic kind of a partnership with proxy groups and the governments in Sunni countries as well. So it's not that. So it's not only a Shia country or Shia groups also, and that's what it gives us added strength. Coming to India, frankly, I mean, India is a friend of both. We had to reduce importing our oil and crude supplies from Iran under the Karza sanctions of the United States. We did as long as we could, and Iranians do understand that. But at the same time, we have other things. Iran remains our strategic partner for Afghanistan, for Central Asia, outreach, and for historic reasons. It will remain like that. Israelis do understand that. Iranians understand our relationship with Israel, and most of the Arab world does understand. Because when we dehyphenated our relationship, that Palestinians are our friends, we stand by their cause, we stand by the Palestinian state. At the same time, we also have our strategic partnership with Israel, and which continues to grow. And where question of terror comes, then it is uncompromising. And that's what really prompted, I think, India to issue the very first statement when October 7 attacks by Hamas had happened against the innocent civilians. But then the kind of mayhem that has happened after that, that can cause anybody to question whether it was simply in self-defense or it's beyond. And that's what the whole world is going about it. So India has, Prime Minister Modi has been speaking to Mahmoud Abbas, he spoke to Saudi and the UAE, Emiratis, the Egyptians, the Iranians, and Netanyahu a couple of times. And every time, and apart from all the global leaders, but every time what is we saying is that the war must end, because there is nobody is going to gain out of this war. And frankly, even if for some reason, which is very difficult, Israel is able to decimate military capability of Hamas, fact remains is that de-radicalization will not stop because of the so many innocent civilians being killed, and the retribution and revenge will continue. So India, while has to protect its interest in the maritime domain and otherwise, has to, in my view, act to prevent this war from escalation, further escalation.
Right. So viewers, the point is India is caught in the middle somewhere. We would not like these rivalries of West Asia or the Middle East to escalate beyond a point, because then it destabilizes a lot of our endeavors. There is also the connectivity linkages. We have the I2, U2 and the IMEC, the India, Israel, UAE, USA combination grouping, and also the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. So these things also depend a great deal on stability, or at least some amount of coexistence among these rivals. And for that to happen, it's very important that the war does not escalate to a point where Iran and Israel are directly at loggerheads, and it becomes irretrievable, meaning most of our strategic interests will be destroyed if this war gets bigger. So I agree with Ambassador Trigunayat that we need to try and bring this to a close and hopefully restore our linkages and the plans for transnational connectivity that are very critical for Indian interests. Let me thank Ambassador Trigunayat. I'm out of time, but always great learning from you. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
So viewers, Iran versus Israel is one of the most destabilizing factors, this rivalry in the region, and we saw so many aspects of it in today's discussion. So do think about it. There are different regions where geopolitical competition exists among the local powers, but then what is the role of the outside players, and how have they enabled this rivalry to become so devastating is something for all of us to reflect on, and also what India must do to protect its own interests amid this big rivalry. This is something that we need to apply our mind. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.